You are about to receive messages that may be harmful to your mental state. Your sense of reality will be questioned. Your view on things will be altered. You are now part of the meta. The meta controls everything. The meta determines what will and will not happen. You are watching the Meta Show.
And we're live. Well, here we are. It is a snowy Saturday, and I have a couple of pretty awesome guests lined up. We have Asher here as usual, thankfully, the new as usual. And we don't yet have Warren Simalia from Triumvirate. He's like 5 minutes late, but he's going to be here. We're in contact with him. And we also have his name played up. And wow, we're already getting spammed with subs. Pretty awesome. And I get to have dinging in my ears. Excellent. So Sea Shuffle for 28 months saying that he misses Boat and Druxel. So why don't we do some introductions? Let's start with Asher. Why don't you let us know who you are, and then we'll hand things over to Mawderator.
Hi, I'm the recently demoted 24th best FC in the Imperium, and I come out here because Mitten twists my arm to do so, and we like to talk a lot.
That is very true. Asher and I think, could probably talk paint off a wall if given enough time and inclination. Lots more sub spam actually, so that's fantastic. So we're gonna actually, if we get like a ton of sub hype, we'll have to space this out. S-Shock, Vulcan Raven, Mech 101V, Jackie Eve, Holy Thok, I am Roscoe81. That's a lot of people. So we are actually going to do a new. Speaking of subscribers, before I introduce Moderator, we are going to actually do something for subscribers. I was like thinking, how do we do something that's actually useful for subscribers? We really appreciate the support of the multi-dollar media empire, and maybe I will spend all the money that we get from the Meta Show on buying scotch. Um, but what do we actually do for subscribers besides you guys getting a pretty cool badge? And what we decided to do for the first time is we're going to have a 10-minute long Q&A session at the end of the Meta Show. And so when we get to the 50-minute mark, we're going to put the channel into subscribers only mode, and you guys can ask questions and interrogate our guests or interrogate us, and it will be a subscriber party. And everybody else who is here who's not a subscriber can watch and enjoy, but they won't get to ask the cool questions. So hopefully that'll be popular and people will like it. We'll see. Who knows? We've never done it before. We're going to give it a whirl. So let's introduce our guest. So Moderator. Moderator was suggested as a guest for the Meta Show this week because he wrote a lengthy article on Reddit that took off. Well, really on his own blog, but it was posted on Reddit and it took off there, analyzing the sort of the competitive environment that EVE Online is in vis-a-vis World of Tanks and Albion Online. Moderator, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm obviously Moderator. I've been a tournament commentator for the last 2 years for CCP, and I've also been involved in pretty much every scale of the game, from small gang and solo, all the way up to mid-scale, wormholes, and being in large soft brawls. These days, I'm in Snuffed Out.
Interesting. How long have you been in Snuffed Out?
I've been in Snuffed Out for, I'm getting close to about a year now.
Okay, so that's a pretty substantial amount of time. There are rumors. I guess before we get into this, we'll have to, one of the questions I would want to ask you is I hear rumors that you might be interested in a CSM run. Your name is being floated as a potential candidate. Is that a thing that may or may not be happening?
Yes, that's actually the reason. Well, part of the reason that I've been doing some of these articles is that while I've wanted to do some pieces on these kind of issues that are not being raised, I also need to be pragmatic and raise some publicity and get my name out there if you want to be successful in any sort of public election.
That is entirely reasonable. All right, so Asher, what are we going to be talking about today? It's been kind of like I'd say it's a relatively quiet week in EVE, but we do have this massive series of battles that have been taking place against the a slap fight of sorts. Test and crew are sieging a triumvirate Keepstar. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what else you think is going on? Also, thank you, Mac Helsinki.
It's been we had sort of a few weeks of really a lot of activity, and everyone in the galaxy was kind of focusing on the 9-Tech 4 Keepstar, and we've covered that a lot. But then the Joint Region Federation and Test and Horde and Guardians of the Galaxy have all teamed up against Tri to try to take down Triumvirate's Keepstar. So Triumvirate's been fighting sort of an outnumbered fight, and they've defended it pretty well so far, but it has finally been pushed into Final Timer. These guys have, it's been maybe 5 or 6 to 1 against Triumvirate, and they've been extracting a lot of blood in all the fights, but they did lose the shield and lose the armor timer. So the final timer it's either tomorrow or the day after. I think it's tomorrow, and it's probably going to be the same amount of people coming again. You're probably going to see, like I said, all of Joint Region Federation, Russians, Darkness, Guardians of the Galaxy, Horde, Test, all against Tri alone.
That's going to be curious. I think we were going to have to hold off on that discussion until we actually get Warren here, because it's worth waiting for the leader of the person whose stuff is getting sieged before we get into that. So I guess the top story will be, and I even have fixed my graphics appropriately so I can use the top story intro reel that our dudes came up with. So we're going to do that. I think the top story today is going to have to be discussing Mawderator's article and the argument that he's making about why Eve is the way it is. So here we go. Funny graphics time. All right. It's almost as if my hard drive didn't have to get wiped 2 weeks ago and everything rebuilt from nothing. So we are now officially in our top story because we had a pretty graphic. So, Mawderator, why don't you introduce your piece? What is the central argument of your article? And also, I will let me link it here for everybody in chat. I know that we typically like to focus on things that are on the Imperium News website in general because it's an INN show, but this is a pretty compelling piece that you've written.
So the central argument is that in any kind of a marketplace, one of the inherent rules in capitalism is that if you have two different competing entities, they're forced to improve the quality of the goods and services. And I don't want to draw too many analogs to real life because obviously, the economy is a lot more complicated than that. But Eve's in a place where they don't have a lot of competition, and part of the reason that it feels like they can skate by a little bit and not iterate on areas of the game that haven't been touched on or simply broken is because there's no outside pressures that are forcing them to improve.
Now, would you say that there's no outside pressure besides, I mean, from a certain perspective, you could say that there's no outside pressure. Like there's not a Star Citizen, or in the case of World of Tanks, your article mentions World of Tanks versus War Thunder, where they had to fight off competition. But is there not a degree of inherent competition in just the marketplace itself of people not playing Eve? Like the competition of Eve is to just not log in because nothing's going on. And we have seen the number of logged in players decline and stagnate periodically over the last few years. And at the same time, there hasn't really been that much of a direct competitor. How do you explain just the marketplace itself for gamers' attention?
I mean, I think you can say that of pretty much any game. I mean, when PUBG got released or when Witcher got released or any sort of a major title, you're going to see a bit of a dip in the attention of gamers in general, just because there are only so many hours a day you can actually play whatever game excites you. And you can say that about games in any marketplace.
Is CCP the AT&T of sandbox games, where you can not play sandbox games, or you can play Eve, and that's your only choices?
I mean, there are other sandbox games out there, but there aren't that many out there that have ever been successful with any of the depth economically, politically, socially, or in some of the PvP mechanics that EVE Online has. And that's what I'm specifically focusing on in the article.
Well, let's assume for the moment that your critique is accurate, and the argument that you made was you used the example of both Albion Online and with World of Tanks. And from what I understand, you're saying that the early days of World of Tanks in Clan Wars, where actually Goodstorm had a pretty active group of people involved in Clan Wars, and I remember the bad old days of chasing gold, where essentially once War Thunder came out and was crushed and Armored Warfare was crushed, you say that they've just sort of shifted into milking that game for as much profit as possible. Is that something that you are concerned about with Eve? Do you see CCP currently like milking Eve?
I think to a certain extent, there's some aspects of that, but I think that there are some other aspects of it where they may simply feel that marketing to a certain niche isn't profitable or isn't worth their time and effort, and therefore they're doing what they might be able to try to market to the general public as a whole, to some degree of success.
Well, I'm kind of curious about this. I do want to interject here. It does look like we have Warren and Simalia here. Do you have a working microphone, and are you among the living? This is always the joy of first-time Discord, is you need to set up a push-to-talk key and all that other good shit. I see Warren in the channel, but he's not talking yet. So interject when you get a chance and when you have everything up and running. What do you, I mean, so moderator, what do you think should be done? I mean, you're identifying a problem here in your article. Do you have a solution statement or something, some sort of like a platform, like elect me to the CSM and then I will push for blah?
I think running on a platform for the CSM is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Council of Stellar Management actually does.
Good
body.
answer. That is correct. Yes. And
but what I'm trying to do is trying to set up a basis of a framework saying, okay, there are certain issues in the game, and then I'm going to try to address certain aspects of different terrain in EVE. So certain high-sec problems, low-sec in faction warfare, and null-sec, NPC null, and then wormhole. And those are kind of individual pieces on their own that merit a good amount of discussion. Some of the things that, I mean, strike me in particular being relevant in nullsec is that CCP is making some effort to changing things like the void bombs that are oppressive towards any sort of a shield doctrine, and changing that out for essentially a guided projection similar to what we see on super capitals that newts people. But there are other aspects of citadels that are incredibly oppressive and are simply not being addressed.
so, okay, I'm just trying to bring this back here. Asher, what do you think, given the arguments that he's made in this, what do you think that should be done, or is there anything that could be done to make CCP more responsive to the needs of the players?
I think he's right. I mean, I think he's correct, and I think that, I mean, we've seen the attitude 5 years ago in that leaked memo about the monocles. You know, basically with
Greed is
Hilmar.
good, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's not like anything new, but I think CCP's major issue is that they don't believe their product has a lifespan. We've seen games, there are MUDs from the 1980s that people are still paying for today. We've seen games that have lasted forever, but generally the people have invested in the product, and CCP seems to be more pessimistic about their game than the people playing it. And so, you know, if you told me that EVE was going to be thriving in 10 years, I wouldn't be shocked. But I feel like it would be, it would have to have been invested in. And the CCP seems to be thinking that they're going to, squeeze as much blood from the stone as they can and try to get other products that'll they can pivot to. So I don't know. What needs to be done is CCP needs to believe in themselves, believe in their game. They're the ones who made it, and they believe in it less than the player.
I don't know about that. I mean, sometimes it seems like hubris is their biggest issue. Like they believe too much in it, like in a sense of, you know,
I feel like if they believed in it, they'd have more than like 5 active devs. Like for the amount of subs they have, the number of devs they have is incredibly low compared to other MMOs.
Do we really know how many devs they have active currently? I mean, after they slashed many of the VR programs that they were running on, we've heard tell that there is something happening in London on a new project, but I suppose this is a question for the CSM, and normally we have like CSM guests on. We don't this week. But
I don't mean devs for other games. I mean devs who are doing work on
yeah,
EVE.
that's what I mean is like, whether we had a reallocation or not. Certainly like, um, I don't know, the structures patch is at least a bunch of stuff on Eve. Um,
It took like 8 months for it to happen though. Like I don't know. It feels like 5 years ago the patches had a lot more to them than they do today.
I think that's fair to say. I mean, we have seen a lot of shakeup over in Iceland, and it's possible that like there might be a new direction or some progress, but they're still sort of sifting themselves out of the rubble of all of these corporate restructures and purges, basically. Uh, we don't really have any idea who's working on what, except for the idea of this team or that team. It looks like Warren is going to have to reboot and return. He is dropped off, and God only knows. I don't know. I think that I want to talk about Space War here at least for a second here. So I'm not gonna insist on waiting on Warren at this point. I'm gonna shift over to.
Well, if you want to, Mittens, we can talk about, since Moderator actually talked about this before, we can talk about the new damage controls for hacks and assault frigates, because those
That,
are going to be a pretty big change.
yeah, we were talking about it last week briefly, and then apparently they went back on that. So Asher, why don't you lead us into the topic?
Yeah, so what happened was they had this module that they proposed, I think at Vegas, Eve Vegas, I think, and it was going to be roughly every 2 minutes, you'd get about 18, 19 seconds of really high resists. And it wouldn't work like the Hull Energizer on caps. It wouldn't burn out. It would come back. But there were a lot of like solo people who were complaining that it would make assault frigates really bad in sort of solo or maybe small gang environments. Which, I mean, I think that was true. But what happened was um, it was going to be a good module for hacks, because right now hacks get volleyed by artillery, and it's a really the game you'd have to play with that module is can the enemy FC trick your guys into turning it on? And so it would have been pretty interesting, but the module was good enough that playing that game would have been worth it, rather than giving up the passive resist that you have to give up to use it. It's more like a T1 damage control when it's off. So it was going to be an interesting module for hacks, but then they nerfed it for assault frigates, and they have made it a lot less effective for hacks. And Moderator, I think you read an article about how this is going to be an interesting and sort of a change.
That was actually
talking about this. That was Muck Bavarian. Yeah,
that was Muck Barovian, and I actually have to kind of okay. So I agree with you slightly, but I also disagree with you, and I think a way that kind of needs to be explained. So yes, it's useful for things like Cerberuses that are more long range kiting platforms, but this is not going to change the fact that certain ships like the Munin and the Zealot and the Sacrilege are basically irrelevant and still will be irrelevant after this patch.
It's true. I mean, it was going to make Serbs and Ishtars more usable in today's modern environment of artillery battleships everywhere, I think, but it wasn't going to make the Zealot usable again, right? Because the Zealot needs a lot more love. The Sacrilege needs a lot more love. And the fact that there are so many webs these days, and that the SIG skirmish boost doesn't give you as much SIG reduction as it used to, means that it's hard to run a SIG taking fleet.
SIG tanking fleets are more or less dead, more or less as a function of people understanding what the Hugin and Loki were. I mean, most people, if you go back to battle reports or videos from a few years ago, were not comping those ships in adequate numbers to deal with Zealot fleets and the Tech 3 cruiser fleets that were also known colloquially as armor hacks.
The mediocre FC from today is the top FC from 5 years ago. The level of average knowledge has increased so much that it's you can't get away with things you could. That's basically what SIG tanking fleets were doing. They were getting away with things.
I think the last time we saw SIG tanking fleets used, obviously, besides, well, not like a pure SIG tanking fleet, like with armor, like with afterburning T3s, which are basically armor hacks, but Goku fleets, like the Pro God Legend attempted a SIG tanking stealth bomber fleets that pretty much have a habit of dying. I actually haven't seen one of those deployed in like I think a year even.
He used one recently. They either win really big, like 15% of the time, and then they lose super hard 85% of the time.
That sounds like our man. Then I'm going to try to resist the urge to make snarky comments about that specifically. But
I think I heard Warren. I'm not sure.
Warren is. Whoa!
I'm alive, guys.
Success! Yeah, he was fighting with his Discord settings. Discord was apparently not acknowledging his microphone. So now we get to introduce you. Warren, it's nice to meet you. This is the first time you and I have ever talked anyway. Why don't you say hello to everybody and say who you are?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I was fighting with Discord. Discord's a well-programmed program, so I was. So I am Warren Simalia. I am the current Tri exec. I've been running Tri with Garst and Patrick. Patrick is left, so it's me and Garst is away in a prolonged work trip, so it's me. Been running Tri for the past few months through this FCON war and through this war with XIX. So
sweet. Well, I mean, things are pretty interesting over there. I know that Asher has been helping honorably third party up north a little bit recently, and there's this huge ass Keepstar slap fight that's happening and is coming to a head on, I believe it's is that on Monday? Yeah, exiting its final reinforcement. Why don't you excuse me, give us an overview from your perspective of what's been happening with these back and forth of the Keepstar, and just give us a leader's perspective on what the hell is going on up there.
Yeah, sure. So we've been fighting. We decided to, just the quick background on it, we decided to unblue the DRF many months ago. We decided as a group to kind of adopt the less blue strategy. We saw a lot of blue donuts forming around nullsec, more so than had already been. So we decided to go a different path. We want content. We've always been a content-driven alliance. We unblued DRF, UAX Death, and Care both were very receptive to this. We gave them back our drone land, Sov peacefully for it, and for content, we looked south to our mutual friend FCON and started fighting them. DRF used that as a way to declare war. They came down to protect FCON, who had just joined the DRF conveniently. FCON ended up dying, of course.
Alas.
Alas. To everyone's surprise, they couldn't handle it. But DRF decided to continue the forever war against us. Solar decided to side with them. They're paying the price now. They just lost their largest and most robust corp, TFFN, to XIX about a week ago. That hasn't really hit Reddit. It's been on the Russian forums a lot, though. ISAM, the co-leader with Mac.
What did they lose?
What's that?
I didn't hear what you said. What did they lose?
They lost their largest corp, TFFN. It's their largest capital and super cap group. They joined XIX. They just did it last week, I think.
Okay.
One of the things that I've noticed, and I'm not really sure whether this is validated from like a triumvirate perspective or not, but one of the things that's been curious about these fights is, frankly, how small the capital and super capital presence of the DRF entities has been in these fights.
Yeah, it's actually been interesting. It's been something that I've been interested in finding out for honestly years, was what kind of super and cap numbers the DRF could field. And I had a feeling that it was smaller than a lot of people thought it was going to be, and I feel vindicated in that. The exception is that they've paid for a pretty sizable super and cap fleet to come on their behalf, so it's been a non-issue anyway for them. But yeah, it's been surprising. They form few supers and an underwhelming amount of caps considering the size of their coalition. It's been interesting. So
if you're, if Tri is sort of like a man on an island fighting an entire coalition, and then a sort of a rented coalition that the DRF has been sort of paying for, in these fights, I haven't been paying too close attention because I've been focused on things a little bit closer to home. Can you give our viewers an idea of like how many people are typically on the DRF side attacking you guys versus how many people are on Triumvirate side and defending? Like what's the numbers breakdown?
Yeah, for sure. So they've been for these Keepstar timers. They tried once to ref it just DRF and test, and they failed. They used their typical subcap lob, and we were able to defend it.
And how many people did they bring?
Oh man, you're making me think back. A few weeks ago, it was over 1,000 for sure.
So they brought over 1,000, and how many did you guys have on your side?
Tri can form max 250 to 300, and that's to defend our Keepstar. So.
Okay, so like you guys are fighting outnumbered like 5-1. Is that a typically a fair assessment, or 4-1?
Pretty regularly, considering the backbones DRF can bring. We have some pretty phenomenal allies though with us, with Frat and RMC and Lumpy. We've been great friends for a while now, and it's been super helpful for them to come down for these timers, and we're helping them down in Imensia and whatnot. So it's been nice.
One of the things that's interesting about this is that we noticed that in this Tri Keepstar thing, some of the people in Pandemic Horde who were whining about the 9-TAC-4 fight were claiming that our criticisms of Keepstar mechanics under heavy tie-dye were rendered invalid by the fact that fighting many fewer people and outnumbered 5-1, they could reinforce this Triumvirate Keepstar, and that this shows that with 7,000 people in a system, we should have been able to do just the same in 9TAC4. So I wanted to sort of draw out the kind of numbers breakdown that you guys are dealing with as opposed to the 9TAC4 scenario. But
I'm curious about DRF getting GOTG to fight against you. What happened there? Isn't that weird? Because not a few months ago, GOTG dropped the Keepstar that died and invaded DRF, and then very quickly, even on an Eve scale, they're siding with DRF against you. How did that happen?
That would be a fantastic question that somebody can answer for me as well. I truly don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it was just they're a lot closer to Guardians of the Galaxy than we are. So I think there was maybe a deal struck or something. I think if you guys know their Diplo problems back in the day for DRF, this guy Jay kind of fucked up a lot of stuff for them, gave out a bunch of money to Mercs that didn't end up working out. And I think that was something, there was some sort of rift between that guy and Sword Dragon. I don't know.
Basically, yeah, I mean, that guy is sort of notorious at this point. I am surprised that they actually allowed him control over a wallet to hire mercenaries in the first place, like giving Jay Maricati, Macaroni, whatever, access to a wallet. I mean, he might try to do a charity drive with it. I hear he does that kind of thing. But anyway, we are basically seeing, do you expect? What are you expecting for this final timer? Like, if they've been bringing those kind of numbers, what kind of numbers are you expecting to see on either side for Monday?
I'm expecting a good fight. They've whelped more into this Keepstar than this Keepstar is worth. We've had a lot of pretty awesome times just fighting their fighter bomber and battleship blob to try and ref it. It's been fun. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely expect them to bring the blob again like they do. We have some guys on our side as well that are coming, so I expect a pretty long, drag-out fight. It's not going to be like the Horde Keepstar. We got to 10% tie-dye towards the end of the fight, but it wasn't even 10% the entire time. So back to your argument that that tie-dye saves Keepstars. We didn't have 6,000 people in systems, so it wasn't really the same.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, what's the biggest of all the fights so far? What's the highest local number that you've seen for these engagements?
We got to, I think, for the armor timer, we got to like 1,400 at one point. I think that was the
Oh,
highest.
wow. Okay, yeah, that's basically. I mean, I don't mean to poo-poo it, but I mean that makes a lot of sense as to why like the system was working tie-dye wise. Jay, basically,
Sure. Yeah. I was there. It got a little higher, but yeah, I mean, it's not. We're scales of magnitude off the 9TAC4 fight.
This is always interesting when we talk about like numbers one way or another, and somebody in chat is like, "Goons are talking about being blobbed," and we're talking about somebody else's fight entirely that has nothing to do with us. But that does make me think that maybe we have some viewers from our enemies. It's always entertaining to see that happen. I'm curious, how have Jay's bringing up a good point? How have you guys been enjoying the Arty Rags versus battleships kind of gameplay?
Oh man, it's been entertaining. Yeah, I shot down a bunch of ideas of using them. I didn't think that they would track as well, especially not in tie-dye and having all these moving pieces in a lagged out server. I will admit that I was wrong. They're pretty great.
That's awesome. Yeah, apparently Arty Rags work out pretty well to absolutely blender the hostile maelstroms. So, and what do you think is going to be next? I mean, let's say that it's a good fight one way or the other. If you lose the Keepstar, if you succeed, if you guys are getting regularly outnumbered, like, do you have a plan here, or is it really just to bleed these bastards as much as you can? What do you want for Triumvirate?
Oh, I think we'll be just fine. I mean, if they end up killing this Keepstar, I guess the Alliance is out a few hundred billion ISK, and we move to a Fortizar. I mean, it's definitely not the end of the world for us. We'll continue to fight. We've been fighting the blob now for a long ass time, and we intend to continue. And we intend to continue as a quasi-independent alliance. We have only a few blues, and we don't see this Keepstar as our last bit of life.
How do you guys fund your alliance? Like, how do your pilots meet their funding?
We had a pretty sizable renter alliance for a long time. We still do. So we've owned space for a few years now. So our alliance wallet's still pretty healthy.
I mean, have you guys managed to, like, in terms of like blood and treasure, really the marker for Keepstar? If it's rigged, it costs a little bit more, but pretty much as long as you're doing more than 250 billion ISK to the enemy, uh, in terms of damage, it's paid for itself. Do you have a rough idea of how much blood and pain you've extracted from the bad guys so far?
It's been considerable. So if you count the first time they tried to ref it, they lost about $1 billion in Macarials. And I think Tess brought up Max, and then DRF brought their typical Foon and Mac blob, and we killed about $100 billion there. We killed $100 billion for the armor timer and about $50 billion for the shield timer. So
What was the first one? You said about a bill, and I assume you did more than 1 billion damage.
100, sorry.
Okay, 100 bill. Right. Okay, that's
1
good.
bill. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. On the first day of his Reddit post, that I remember that because Pro God Legend was busy talking about how we should all kill each other, and then he ran off to go storm your castle and failed horribly. Um, Asher, speaking of test or Pro God Legend failing horribly at things, Asher, you've been out there doing some honorable third parties. I know we've been talking about to Warren about this from his perspectives. What can you tell us from a honorable third party perspective? What you've seen thus far, and what your predictions about these engagements are?
Well, it's if the mechanics work, if the server works, it's hard to defend against the fighter blob. Like even, but the servers have to work. I think that it can be done, but you can't do it if you're greatly outnumbered, which they are. So I think that probably what they're doing is they're making the best of a bad situation. The fights have been, the servers are working. That is one thing that's nice about CCP is outside of LowSec, you can get 2,000 in the system now, and the servers work pretty well. They're slow, and we did have like 25% of our fleet DC as we were getting warped on in the last fight, which was unfortunate. But overall, it's still playable, which is good compared to 5 years ago where it'd be much tougher. But go ahead.
I was just gonna say, moderator, you've done a lot of like tournament commentating and the like, and you're sort of like a PvP expert type, aren't you? Maybe you could offer your view on what the current meta that we're seeing in these Keepstar fights tells us about, in your view, Eve currently.
As it pertains to what specifically? I mean,
what do you think about what's going on?
I would definitely like the timers on some of these Keepstars to not be a total of a week. It's a little bit ridiculous that you can have the entirety of Eve basically pile in and more or less crash the server or render it to the point where it can't function properly. And that's not really compelling gameplay for either side. I'm not also a huge fan of the essentially World War I trench meta where you have one side sitting tethered on a Keepstar and one side sitting on a Fortizar.
I'm telling you, a tether module, 50-60% resist, one side can rep it, one side can shoot it, and you can turn off tether. Then you can camp any citadel they don't defend. Then you don't have these stupid let's sit and be able to read tether fights. It would make citadels much better.
I honestly agree. I think that if we could have a legitimate commitment from either side to be able to fight, I think this would be a much better fight on both sides. At the end of the day, you have a lot of these fights that just end up in pages and pages of fighter kill mills, which nobody cares about, and it's sad that you're not going to have any more of those station brawls of the old Sov where a bunch of stuff dies on a station and all you have docking mechanics and things like that. It's still not the same.
It just seems weird with the timing. I mean, having two fights back to back, and sort of like what moderator is talking about here, like the fact that everybody has 6 days to form up the biggest blob they possibly can, is it does create headlining fights, but so far those headlining fights haven't been very good for CCP. Like the MTAC O Keepstar fight, which was like, oh my god, the first Keepstar is going to get destroyed. It was essentially undefended by CO2. and it was just this
CO2 was
tie-dye.
in Tri's position. They just wanted to extract what they could. They weren't going to save it.
Well, they didn't even. I mean, CO2 basically didn't even fight by the time it got to the end. I mean, I suppose they barely did, but like Triumvirate has been putting up a fuckload more of a fight. And somebody did calculate in chat the amount of blood and treasure. It's like north of 285 billion ISK has already been destroyed by Tri and crew. So they've already paid for the Keepstar functionally in terms of destruction. But having these big headlining battles where it's like, okay, 6 days for everybody to bat phone everybody else, and then the servers lag, and with the Imtaco Keepstar, there was just barely any point for CO2 to show up by the end of it, even if they were going to fight. And then the view of EVE Online that is put around the gaming world is, hey, look, you can watch a space station getting destroyed over 6 hours in 10% tie-dye, where it's just pointless for one side to even try to fight back. It's just sort of like I think an ugly precedent.
I'm not necessarily opposed to the epic engagements where you have a lot of time to prepare. It's just that the fights are not designed to be fun. Like that's why I want a tether module that's destroyable, or at least turn offable for some period of time. Because right now those fights that come after 6 days are boring tether fights where both sides have anchored citadels that they essentially fight from, and that's not enjoyable. I mean, this isn't Battle of Britain, the game. We don't want to see our drones fighting each other in the middle of space over the English Channel. So we want to see people getting in there and slugging it out and fighting, and it's just not encouraged. So they're encouraging these epic fights, but the fights themselves are not epic. So it's just bad design.
I agree. I think that the ability to have a citadel on another enemy citadel's grid is really the issue here, because it allows, I mean, you don't have to commit. You can sit and tether and then boat your fighters over. And so you can either blame the long lock range of carriers, or you can blame the ability to be able to tether on your own or on the enemy's grid.
I kind of disagree, because I feel like, I mean, having just said all I said about the fights being bad, if that mechanic didn't exist, I don't think people would siege other people's citadels at all.
Yeah.
You'll just never get your money out of it. It won't even be close. Citadels will murder you if you weren't able to do that. So
it's like it's a siege tower mechanic. Like Asher's absolutely right. Like there is a fight to get a citadel online on the same grid as another citadel. So like we had to strategize and do that to get citadels around the 9-Tech-4 Keepstar. And once we had that sort of base station, it's like building your own siege tower next to a castle's wall, and then you like use that to go up and over. I mean, the fighter spam mechanics are kind of a pain in the ass because of what they do to the servers, and then there's this question of, is it engaging gameplay about like fighters fighting fighters. However, even if you do have a bunch of people on a Fortizar staging an attack on a Keepstar, like you can escalate on that, right? Like PL and NC could have dropped their Titans on our Fortizar and nuked a whole bunch of our stuff before we managed to tether in that lag. So there's at least a stepping stone of risk, I think. But I don't know. It's gonna get worse though. I mean, you're gonna need those siege towers much more when the structure patch hits in just like 2 weeks or whatever, because we have even more buffs to citadels coming. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I would.
Well, speaking of fair points, we are actually going to be initiating something that we've never done before, which is we're getting almost to the 15-minute mark. I'm going to start this a little early because when we have a fair point, we're going to keep talking here about stuff, but we're going to go into subscribers only mode and start taking questions from people who are subscribers. Any questions that you might have for the guests, assuming that I can do this correctly. Okay, so now we should actually be in subs only mode. Which will probably make a lot of people who were talking about how goons suck a few minutes ago very angry but impotent. So if you guys have questions for Warren, for Mawderator, for Asher, or for myself, feel free to ask them, and we will go around and see what happens. And I guess Jay is going to start us off by saying, does Mittens wear red underwear to match his red pants and red socks? I actually don't have red socks. All my socks are black, and I wear these like black Calvin Klein underwear, which are silk and really, really, really comfortable.
Too much info, Mittens. Too much info.
Hey, Jay wanted to know, and I'm just, he asked the first question, so he got the first thing. How many people? So Moomin asks, how many people have Tri called to help out, and does this include NC for the upcoming Keepstar fight, Warren?
I'm sorry, you cut out. Say that one more time.
How many people have Triumvirate called to help out for the upcoming Keepstar fight, and does that include NC?
So there's been a lot of talk. I constantly on Reddit every time we go that we live underneath this PLNC umbrella. Yet I haven't seen PL on grid probably in a few months with us. So I'm not sure where that comes from. But NC might show up. They showed up last time. I know they fought you guys for a little bit, killed a bunch of their Lokis, and I think they left. But no, I don't think NC is showing up in anything substantial. We're going to have our normal allies with Frat and RMC and Lumpy there. A few other guys coming, but I'm not going to reveal everybody on our list just yet.
And they tried to work on my fleet a few times, and they ate a lot of missiles, died, and left.
Yeah, you were bringing a serb fleet up there,
Yeah.
which somebody's asking you, are you the 24th best FC? Stargak wants to know, or the 25th currently?
It's 24 out of 24.
24 out of 24. There's no 25? Okay.
No, that's it.
Gotcha. You're down to the very bottom. Well, that's unfortunate. Maybe your next serb fleet will work out pretty well.
Just need someone above me to retire.
Exactly. Shock asks if somebody will ever give you back, if you'll ever give him back his claw.
Is he talking to me?
Yeah. Will Asher ever give me back my claw? Apparently, you borrowed a claw from him.
I'll give it back to him. Tell him to message me.
Okay. So I have a more serious question here, which would be from Mad Viking for Warren here, which is how constant are Tri numbers, considering that you're fighting so outnumbered all the time? What have they been like? I guess what's the status of your line?
It's been fantastic. We've had continuously great numbers forming up from our dudes, even though a lot of it does end up being blue balls from trying to fight 1,200 guys with 200. But yeah, it's been fantastic from us. We've continued to have great cap numbers, great guys in fleet. Dudes are motivated. We've had a bunch of skirmish FCs step up and handle the great Entosis ops of our days. So
it's good to know. Have you found, this is a question for Moomin, has it hurt you guys to lose FCs such as like Captain Patrick Archer?
For sure. Patrick was pretty AFK leading up to the war. He ended up getting a pretty significant real life job and took a step back from Eve. And then our drama there is well maintained, but I'm still good friends with Pat and still love him. Fred left, FRSD left, who's a well-known FC. He got pretty tired of doing the large-scale fleets and went to Skill Yourself, and that did hurt. That hurt us since we just lost a large-scale FC. That'll hurt any alliance. But we've been able to step up and manage the void, and we've been good.
How do you guys build FCs? How do you groom them?
We take volunteers, right? Like most lines do. Guys that want to step up, we give them skirmish rights. They can take skirmish fleets out like most alliances will do, and if we see promising results, we'll try and groom them into a larger scale FC.
Have you found that this war has sort of injected new blood into your FC core?
For sure. That's to say the least. Absolutely. We've had a bunch of guys step up that have had FC stuff experience in the past and kind of fell out of it, and they've stepped up immensely recently. A couple guys, and give shout outs to Irenia has been great. Orion, as I'm going to forget a bunch of guys and they're going to yell at me later for it, but we've had a ton of dudes. Ziggs, for sure, who's a member of my corp, has been fantastic stepping up, and they've learned a lot and gotten immensely better even over the past last 1 or 2 months. So
there appears to be an airplane crashing in your house, so just be careful.
I live directly next to a speed trap, so about 20 times a day I hear sirens.
Wow. So a couple of other questions. Yes, we have a Stellaris gameplay stream tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central. I'll be doing that again. I also am delighted to see that we have emotes of an actual Like a Goon Swarm B on the channel emotes now. So that is so we can spam Fat Bees in addition to Imperium Black Eagles. I got a general question here from Degerzith, which is probably mispronouncing your name, which is, does anybody here think that there's ever going to be like an Eve 2? And I'm going to go ahead and just answer that myself. I don't think that there will be an Eve 2. I think it would probably be a better idea for CCP to try to develop an Eve 2 than to many of their other recent attempts at a game, because even if they did try to make an Eve 2 and then they failed to do it, the process of developing a second Eve would result in them being forced to critically think about many of the existing game mechanics. So even
I
if
don't
Eve
believe
2,
what? Why
yeah,
would they develop Eve 2?
yeah, that's a very good question. Also, yeah, fat bees everywhere. It's really cool that we actually have a fucking fat bee emote. I think that is INNTVB, long overdue. Uh, Another question over here for Warren. What's next for Try? What's next for Try if the Keepstar dies? Are you going to keep fighting DRF? I know that you talked about this before a little bit, but I think Jay's question really is, are you going to be fighting in the same area geographically? You said that you just moved to Fortizar, or would you use this as an opportunity to reposition?
Oh, absolutely. We'll stay exactly where we are. We're not even going to change systems. We have Fortizars to move to. That Keepstar, actually, myself, Garst, and Patrick almost didn't even anchor it. We decided to have one, but for a while we didn't want a Keepstar at all in our space. We figured it would be too much of an anchor in our own areas and prevent us from deploying. So losing it is a losing ISK, and it'll be what it is. But we can whelp a capital fleet worth more than this Keepstar, so we'll be fine.
We've got one from Skellig Echo. I'm going to direct this one to Moderator. With the low cost of Keepstars compared to how hard it is to kill them, is it going to be a problem for, I don't know what he says by
For non-null, he means
non-null, for non-null superpowers?
For people who don't have just tons of ISK.
I think the actual difficulty is actually getting the thing to really online. If you get scouted before you can anchor the thing, then you're in major trouble, because everyone's going to want to come and kill that. We saw that happen when Wrecking Crew tried to anchor a Keepstar, and they didn't have significant numbers. CVA and everyone else nearby them immediately came over and destroyed the thing.
I'm kind of curious. I think in general, the every time that we see entrenched wealth and entrenched strategic power, the harder that CCP makes things. Like we've talked about this many times before on the Meta Show and on Fireside Chats, one way or the other. Whenever CCP tries to make life more difficult for nullsec empires in general, not only does it actually help those who are already on top, but it makes it vastly more difficult for anybody who isn't already a superpower to do a fucking thing, right? Like we'll often focus in terms of balance issues as like how does it change things up between the number 1, 2, and 3 alliances in terms of power, but every time that they do alter the game to make things harder one way or another, it makes it almost even more impossible. Like I think it's almost impossible for a new nullsec power to really get started and even think about having a Keepstar without joining a coalition and getting absorbed by a coalition, or just getting crushed into dust as a shiny kill mail as it stands. And I think that is just getting worse. I do have another question here for Warren, and I'm not sure whether this is going to be an offensive question or not, because I don't know too many of the details, but Voltels is asking, how much ISK did Captain Patrick Archer embezzle before he got exposed by Jay Macaroni, and how embarrassing was it for CPA for the enemy to have his full API for the duration of the war?
So Patrick didn't embezzle from the alliance. It was a corp issue from him that was a problem between himself and the old CEO of his corp that I don't necessarily want to get into. But Jay definitely did not expose him. It was his corp that called him out. But Jay having his API for the duration of the war was an interesting twist towards the end of him leaving. But so that was a little embarrassing, more so for himself, but I think embarrassing for all of Try to begin with, since we shit talked Jay so much the entirety of the war.
That's so we have another question here, which is from Gus Mikado, which is on the topic of CCP investing in their product. And this is, I'm going to throw this one to Moderator because, he's really the current, since he wrote about this recently. Do you think CCP can do anything in terms of software or hardware to try to lessen or eliminate time dilation?
I mean, they've already done a number of significant things in terms of getting what they call the tech-free hardware, but there's a lot of technical debt that goes into the base code of maintaining what is essentially a 15-year-old game, and there's only so much they can do without a full code rewrite to allow for multi-threading, and that would be basically creating Eve 2. So they're doing more or less what they can, it seems. I'm not a technical programming expert, but this is all the information I've seen and more or less what I've gotten after having communicated to devs in person.
One of the things about tie-dye is, as a older player, it's so much better than it was back in the day. And this is, this is one of those challenges when you say that something that existed before like 2012 was worse, because most of the people who are playing Eve today weren't necessarily around. But the alternative to tie-dye is the black screen, right? And I don't think that there's much that CCP can do except for trying to bolt on more server technology and like just having more horsepower. Whenever players get more organized in their networks, they're always trying to outnumber each other, because that's how you win wars throughout human history, is always be there firstest with the mostest, right? That's what you do. So there's always this constant arms race amongst the player base to better organize, to better federate, to better improve their logistics, to bring more dudes to the battle, whatever that battle is. So over the course of history, players have always managed to bring more than the servers can handle at any given point. The thing about tie-dye is that it is, except for the shit that breaks, like in extreme scenarios, like the 9-4 Keepstar fight, where you simply couldn't load your fighters, or scenarios where your dread guns don't work. At the lower levels, tie-dye makes things more fair, because back in the day, you would just have a black screen. Like Eve would just go black and you couldn't log back in, and your guns just wouldn't work, and it was a roll of the dice to find out which side would go in and be able to win. It would be a turkey shoot. It would be shitty for both sides, because, on the one hand, like, you're winning in a heavy lag environment, but like one of your buddies in fleet is logged in and the server is working for him, and he's just like mowing down things as fast as he can, and you're black screened and can't do shit. And if your enemies have more or less dudes who are black screened, like, they would just win the fight. It had nothing to do with pilot skill. It had nothing to do with planning. It was just shitty. So tie-dye is annoying, but during the Great War, it was fucking terrible, because in the Great War you'd have these major player engagements that would just be decided by a fucking dice roll. And you'd go like, well, we're going to send our fleets in here, and then the server doesn't work, but it works for the other guys. So you find out like, well, you just lost a whole bunch of shit. And back in the day, ships were a hell of a lot more expensive and harder to replace. So tie-dye does suck in the sense that it's it's frustrating to fight through, but it is, in my opinion at least, a fuckload better than a fucking black screen.
I've got a question for you guys.
Okay.
This is for all three. The New England Patriots are favored to beat the Philadelphia Eagles by 5 points. Can the Eagles cover the spread? Who should I bet on?
As a pretty diehard New York Giants fan, I pray for the demise of the Philadelphia Eagles on a daily basis, so bet on the Patriots.
That's not the kind of analysis I expect from you guys. You kind of disappointed me.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I didn't even know it was the Eagles. I knew it was the Patriots in the Super Bowl, but I haven't been keeping up with the NFL that much over the last couple of years.
That makes me feel better, because then I'm not the most unplugged sports guy here. I at least knew it was the Eagles versus the Patriots. So
what's the actual spread, Asher?
Patriots by 5.
I'd take the Patriots there.
All right, I'm gonna bet on the Eagles. We'll do a little side bet. Not in game though, because I don't want to break any EULAs.
Oh my, that's pretty hilarious. So a couple more questions here before we go. I'm actually delighted to see that we have enough engaged subscribers to actually have a bunch of questions to talk. It would have been pretty awkward for us to do like a 10-minute subscriber only Q&A and then just have fucking crickets. So instead, I'm trying to figure out some questions here. Should they try to nerf corp or alliance size? Talking about methods of dealing with tie-dye. The thing is that this is something that people will bring up, and it's a reasonable question. But the reason why it never happens and never works is that people can organize and coordinate outside of Eve. You can't actually nerf corporation or alliance size. Before Eve had added the sovereignty skill in 2006, early baby Goonfleet actually had 3 corporations because you could only have 1,000 people in a corporation until they added sovereignty that would allow you to add 1,000 people per. And so we ended up with Goonfleet and Goonwafa and then Goon Platoon. And so similarly, you couldn't really have an artificial restriction on corporation or alliance size because, you know, what happens when you see these like blue donut or blue troll things, like particularly when we're fighting against the Northwest, it's just a fucking hodgepodge of random ass alliances bringing 30 or 40 people all together in one big blob that's been coordinated by Discord and, you know, people all using one mumble architecture. So you can't really artificially restrict stuff. People are smart, they'll organize around it, and that just doesn't really function exactly as Jay says in chat. You can just go goons from Federation 1, goons from Federation B, goons from Federation I, etc. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. I think. Any last words from everybody before we go for the week? Warren, what you got?
Nothing. Thanks for having me on, guys. Look forward to a good fight on Monday against the RMT blob. And thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Moderator?
Thanks for having me on, and thank you for everyone who's helped contribute to allowing me to have some research into writing some of the articles I'm working on, and stay tuned for more later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Asher, hopefully you will win your side bet, which is totally not happening in EVE Online.
I just want to say, do not vote for me for CSM. If elected, I will not serve.
That's excellent. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot, and thank you to our subscribers for playing ball. And I hope you guys enjoyed the subscriber-only question time. Thank you for our creative team for getting a fat P for INN. That is fantastic. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central Time, we're going to be doing the Stellaris stream as usual to continue the adventures of the Xyrus Directorate as we do things in space. Thanks a lot, guys, and we will catch you next week, after I run the intro again and play us out.
You are about to receive messages that may be harmful to your mental state. Your sense of reality will be questioned. Your view on things will be altered. You are now part of the meta. The meta controls everything. The meta determines what will and will not happen.